Good morning, children. Welcome to the class. So, let's start the same lesson, The Enemy by Paulus Buck. So, children, in the last class, we have seen that Dr. Sadao's house is situated on the coast of Japan. His house was made up of a square stone. We have also read about his father, who was a true patriot. His father's main concern was Sadao's education. He wanted to give him best education. He had taken all the pains to build his career. He was sent to America to learn surgery, and Sadao's father's dream came true when Sadao became not only a successful doctor but also a successful scientist. We have also read that how in America he met Hannah, but he didn't fall in love with her until he was sure that she was a Japanese girl. Because if she wouldn't be a Japanese girl, she would not be accepted by Sadao's father. Now let's see. Now he felt her hand on his arm and was aware of the pleasure it gave him, even though they had been married years enough to have the two children, for they had not married heedlessly in America. They had finished their work at school and had come home to Japan, and when his father had seen her, the marriage had been arranged in the old Japanese way, although Sadao and Hana had talked everything over beforehand. Although some years had passed since they were married, they had already two children, but still it seemed as if they were newly married. They had love for each other. They had deep love for each other. They were a perfect couple. Here the writer says that they had not married heedlessly in America. In America, they didn't marry carelessly. No, they took time. Their love became mature after the completion of education. They came back to Japan. Sadao's father saw Hana. He gave the approval, and then in a traditional Japanese way, the both were married. Although Hana and Sadao had already settled everything in advance, that how they have to do, how they have to marry, all the plans were fixed, made in advance. But when they came to Japan, when Sadao's father agreed, permitted, then only the both were married. It was at this moment that both of them saw something black come out of the mist. It was a man. He was flung up out of the ocean, flung, it seemed, to his feet by a breaker. It was at this moment, means at that very time, that the both were standing outside of their house near the railing. They saw something black coming out of the mist. Earlier we have already read that the beach was slowly and gradually being covered with mist. So, out of the mist, they saw something black was coming out. Then after some time, they saw actually the black thing was man. Then they guessed that maybe any man was thrown away by the big powerful wave on the shore. He staggered a few steps, his body outlined against the mist, his arms above his head. Then the cold mist hit him again. Stagger means to walk unsteadily, to walk as if to fall. The man who was looking black in the mist staggered a few steps, walked a few steps unsteadily. Some parts of his body were visible, such as his hands were above his head, but after that he became invisible. He was covered by the mist. Who is that? Hannah cried. She dropped Sada's arm and they both leaned over the railing of the veranda. Now they saw him again. The man was on his hands and knees, crawling. Then they saw him fall on his face and lie there. Hannah was afraid. She left the hands of her husband and then the both bent over the railing to see the man. Then after some time, the man who was totally invisible again became visible and he was crawling on his hands and knees. And after crawling a few steps, the man lay unconscious on his face. A fisherman perhaps, Sada said, washed from his boat. He ran quickly down the steps and behind him Hannah came, her white sleeves flying. A mile or two away on either side there were fishing villages, but here was only the bare and lonely coast, dangerous with rocks. The shore beyond the beach was spiked with rocks. Somehow the man had managed to come through them. He must be badly torn. Then Sada guessed that maybe he was a fisherman. He was washed away by the sea waves. And saying this, Sada quickly climbed down the steps to go to the man. Hannah also followed him, and when Hannah was going, her sleeves were flying in the air. Actually, 1 or 2 miles away from Sada's house. On the both sides of the beach, there were fishermen's villages. But here on the coast, there was only Sada's house. Sada's house was a lonely house, solitary house. There was no other inhabitation. And the coast had become dangerous due to pointed rocks. The foamy waves of the sea were also full of spiked rocks, pointed rocks. But anyway, the man had managed to come out of the waves. But his body, his face must have been torn with the rocks. They saw when they came toward him that indeed it was so. The sand on one side of him had already a stain of red soaking through. When they went very close to the man, then they saw that really the man's body was totally torn, wounded. The sand of one side had become stained, had so many red spots. He is wounded, Sada exclaimed. He made haste to the man, who lay motionless, his face in the sand, an old cap stuck to his head soaked with sea water. He was in wet rags of garments. Sada stopped, Hannah at his side, and turned the man's head. They saw the face, a white man. Hannah whispered. Sada told, he is wounded. And then Sada saw the man's face closely. The man was wearing a cap, and the cap was totally drenched. Then, anyway, Sada turned the man's face towards him, and then they could see his face. Seeing his face, Hannah cried, "Oh, it's a white man." White man means here, he was any foreigner. The wet cap, yes, it was a white man. The wet cap fell away and there was his wet yellow hair, long as though for many weeks it had not been cut, and upon his young and tortured face was a rough yellow beard. He was unconscious and knew nothing that they did for him. Sada also agreed. Sada also told, yes, really, he is a white man. His cap, which was totally muddy and crushed, had fallen away, and his yellow hair was visible. On his torn face, he had yellow beard. Now Sada remembered the wound, and with his expert fingers he began to search for it. Blood flowed freshly at the touch. On the right side of his lower back, Sada saw that a gun wound had been reopened. The flesh was blackened with powder. Sometime, not many days ago, the man had been shot and had not been tended. It was bad chance that the rock had struck the wound. Now Sada suddenly remembered his wound. Sada's skilled hands, skilled fingers started searching his wound. And with the touch of his fingers, the wound of the man became fresh. The fresh blood started flowing. Actually, the man might have been shot some days before, and due to the gunpowder, the wounded part of his body had become black, and as the wound was not tended, not looked after, so the condition was very serious, and unluckily today the wound had striken against the spiked rock, so the condition had become more serious. "Oh, how he is bleeding," Hannah whispered again in a solemn voice. The mist screened them now completely, and at this time of day no one came by. The fisherman had gone home, and even the chance beachcombers would have considered the day at an end. Hannah felt sad, felt sorry, pity for the wounded man. Hannah told, "Oh, the wound is bleeding so badly." Slowly and gradually, they all were hidden by the mist. They totally became invisible. No one could see them. And by this time, fishermen had also already gone. Beachcombers means the people who search on beach, they had also gone. So there was no chance, no probability of any person to pass through that way. What shall we do with this man? Sada muttered. But his tanned hands seemed of their own will to be doing what they could to stanch the fearful bleeding. Stanch. Stanch means to stop the flow of liquid. He packed the wound with the sea moss that strewed the beach. Strew, S-T-R-E-W, strew. Strew means spread by scattering. Strew, strewed, strewn. The man moaned with pain in his stupor, unconsciousness, but he did not awaken. Sada muttered, Sada told in low voice to himself that what should he do with this man? Although his mouth was speaking this, but his skilled fingers, hands were doing their own work. Were doing their own work means he was a doctor. So his fingers were doing the work, were treating the wound. He took some moss from the beach and filled the wound with this moss. The man, who was still unconscious, cried out of pain. The best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea, Sada said, answered himself. Now that the bleeding was stopped for the moment, he stood up and dusted the sand from his hands. Yes, undoubtedly, that would be best, Hannah said steadily, but she continued to stare down at the motionless man. Sada had asked one question to himself, that what he should do with this man, so he answered also himself. He told that the best thing would be that he should put the man into water again. And now as the bleeding had stopped, so Sada stood up and removed his dust from the hands. His wife Hannah also agreed with him. His wife also told, yes, they should put the man into the water. But although she was telling this, but her eyes were still at the motionless man. Means still she was feeling pity for him. If we sheltered a white man in our house, we should be arrested, and if we turned him over as a prisoner, he would certainly die, Sada said. Sada was in dilemma, in confusion. Sada told that if they would shelter this man, if they would give this man shelter, then they would be arrested. Because they would give shelter to an enemy. And if they put the man into the water, then the man would die. The kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea, Hannah said, but neither of them moved. They were staring with a curious repulsion upon the inert figure. What is he? Hannah whispered. The both were telling this, that he should be put into water, but neither of them were moving. It means their conscious, their heart was not allowing for that. They wanted that he should be put into water, but their heart was not allowing. That how a man should be allowed to die. There is something about him. What is he? Hannah whispered. There is something about him that looks American, Sada said. He took up the buttered cap. Yes, there, almost gone, was the faint lettering. A sailor, he said, from an American warship. He spelled it out. U.S. Navy. The man was a prisoner of war. Then Hannah asked, that what is he? Means to which country does he belong? To which community does he belong? Then Sada told that perhaps America. And then Sada saw his buttered cap. The letters, something was written on the cap, but the letters had had become faint. But anyway, he could read, and it was written U.S. Navy. So, they concluded that he had escaped from the war, U.S. Navy. He has escaped, Hannah cried softly, and that is why he is wounded in the back. Sada agreed. So they both agreed that he was a prisoner who had escaped from the war. They hesitated, looking at each other. Then Hannah said with resolution, "Come, are you able to put him back into the sea?" "If I am able, are you?" Sada asked. "No," Hannah said, "but if you can do it alone." Now the both were telling the same thing, that he should be put into the water, but neither of them were moving. Why? Because after all, they were human beings. After all, they had heart. After all, might be he was an enemy, but he was also a human, and he was in very bad condition. So, their heart was not allowing them to put the man into water. Sada hesitated again. "The strange thing is," he said, "that if the man were whole, I could turn him over to the police without difficulty. I care nothing for him. He is my enemy. All Americans are my enemy. And he is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is. But since he is wounded." Sada gave an explanation to his wife that if the condition of the man would be better, then certainly he could hand him over to the army, to the police, because he was an American and all the Americans were his enemy. But as his condition was not good, so being a doctor, how could he let him die? "You also cannot throw him back to the sea," Hannah said. "Then there is only one thing to do. We must carry him into the house." Then Hannah told, "If you cannot put him into water, now one option is left only, and that is they should give the man shelter." Okay, that's all. Thanks.